Back, everybody. Let's get into those unemployment figures that were released yesterday. And according to Statistics South Africa, 2.2 million people lost their jobs during the lockdown, meaning that there were only 14.1 million people employed in South Africa. This is the lowest since 2011. However, Stats SA's figures also show the unemployment rate in the country has decreased from 30.1% in the first quarter of 2020 to 23.3% in the second quarter. Stats SA says this is a reflection of South Africans who were not actively looking for employment in the second quarter, even though they were available to work. It refers to them as discouraged work seekers. Economists say people are not reluctant or discouraged to seek employment, but were confined to their homes due to the lockdown in the second quarter. Let's get some analysis now, because I know that there was a lot of confusion yesterday when these numbers came out. So Dawie Roodt is with us, Chief Economist at the Efficient Group, warning that Stats SA might paint the wrong picture by calling people discouraged work seekers. And he joins us now. Dawie, good to have you. Welcome to the show.
Good morning to you. Thank you.
Dawie, why do you think there is a concern regarding Stats SA possibly painting the wrong picture by calling people discouraged work seekers?
That's a problem with definitions. We have to have a definition on who's unemployed and who's employed, and we have to stick with those definitions, even under unusual circumstances like what we have now. So I think the first takeaway here for us to understand is that we are living in complete unusual times. It's very volatile in the labor market, it's very volatile in the economic numbers, and it's very difficult to make sense of what is going on. It's pretty much the same as with the economic growth numbers of the second quarter that came down by more than 50%. So I think that is part of the answer. A second very important point that I think it needs to be made is that the technique, the way that they did this survey, is also different from previous techniques that has been used. For example, previously what you would do, you would talk to people face to face. This time around, it was telephonic interviews because of the lockdown. And obviously, there will be differences in the way that people react to that. So a second point is that don't put too much emphasis on the numbers themselves. I think we need to wait some time before we can get a clearer picture of the underlying trends as far as employment in the country is concerned. Yeah. And then perhaps a last point that I want to make is that basically to take away some of this confusion, there are three numbers to really concentrate on. And then the first one is how many people's got jobs. The second one is how many people do not have jobs, are actually unemployed. You've referred to these numbers already. And then a third category of people are people that are not economically active. Now, economically active means that you're not looking for a job because you don't want to, or because you work from home, or perhaps you're a student, or you couldn't look for a job because of the lockdown. And what we have seen, looking at all these numbers, fewer people are employed, fewer people are unemployed, but a huge number of people, huge increase in the people that are simply not active. And that means people sitting at home because of the lockdown.
Yeah. So that's sort of the definition that Stats SA were trying to put across, because there was so much confusion amongst people when they looked at that decline in the number, you know, saying from 30% it's gone down to 23%, and that's unemployment. But we've got to keep in mind that the way that Stats SA look at it is that they actually are only looking at the people that are actively searching for jobs. I mean, do you think they perhaps could have done it in a different way this time? Because nobody could be looking for jobs during a lockdown. I mean, it was a lockdown. So, you know, was it a little bit sneaky on their behalf? I asked this because this is what was being said.
No, I certainly don't think that. That's the job of economists, to unpack the numbers, and this is what we're doing now. Good. They have to stick with certain definitions. Those definitions are internationally accepted, and most countries use exactly the same definitions. And what you need to have is somebody, an analyst, to unpack the numbers and to explain what is really going on. I've tried to make some adjustments. So the big difference here from previous years or previous quarters is that we've seen this massive increase in people that are not economically active. Now, if we unpack that number and try to allocate it and to get a number that is more or less comparable over time, then the unemployment numbers, which were in quarter first, was around about 30%, will probably go up to about 36%. So that's a number, but perhaps that we should be looking at. Not the 23%, but it's not wrong from Stats South Africa. That is the definition. If you don't like the definition, change the numbers and change the definition if you want to compare it over time. But I certainly don't think there was a sneaky trick from Stats South Africa that we need to be concerned about.
Good. It's good to hear that, because I think that'll put a lot of people's minds at ease in terms of trying to analyse these numbers. However, there's no getting away from the fact that 2.2 million people, and this is the number that has been put out there, the number of employed persons fell by 2.2 million people. So 14.1 million people in this country are actually employed. I mean, this is devastating. Out of a massive population that we see here in South Africa, this is the total amount of employed people. And I mean, the definition of employed is also something to look at. So, I mean, this is not good for a country that already before the pandemic was struggling.
Well, let's try to put it in perspective. Less than half of the people in the country that can work is actually working. For every person with a job in a country, there are more than 4 people that depend on that specific person on average, for instance. We're probably going to see the economy start growing a little bit now, but there's a lot of the, statistical noise also in economic growth numbers. But I am afraid you're absolutely right. This is absolutely devastating numbers. I think over the next couple of months, what we're going to see, the numbers are going to be all over the place because of the volatility out there and because we're gradually closing down the lockdown. And I think it's important to understand that it's a lockdown causing all of this. And perhaps in a year's time or so, we will get a better indication of the real harm done to the labour market in South Africa. But I'm pretty sure that we're talking about really many, many people that's lost their jobs in a year's time. In a year's time, we will be probably 1 million people below the number that we employed at the beginning of this year in terms of employment. And we're waiting for further economic growth numbers, which is also going to be quite bad. It may look better, and exactly the same with the employment numbers. And that's why I say it is so important to understand that this is totally unusual circumstances that we have at the moment, and the numbers are going to be all over the place. But without a doubt, all the indications are that the South African economy is not in a recession. We are in a very, very deep depression, and part of the consequences of that is a massive increase in unemployment, and that means also a huge increase in poverty in the country.
I mean, if we look forward to 2021, I mean, so many people wishing 2020 over and saying, you know, hopefully things will get better in 2021. If we start looking forward already, are you feeling optimistic, or is this trend, unfortunately, going to ricochet into next year, the year after? I mean, how long is this going to take us to get through?
Well, there are some other trends that's been with us for some time. One is that the industry is getting making less use of labor, making more use of computers and robots and so on. So there was an underlying trend in any event. Another trend that is very important for us to understand is that our labor force in South Africa is not very skilled. And very, very importantly, and the most important factor is that the South African economy is not growing. We may see some positive economic growth, but again, that's purely statistical noise. The economy is not going to grow for a very long time. And one reason for that is simply a lack of electricity. So I am afraid things may look a little bit better, like what we've just seen, the unemployment numbers falling, while it's not really a fall in unemployment. So we may see some of the numbers looking better, but the underlying trends are all moving in the wrong direction. Next year, things may look a little bit better, but I'm afraid because of the lockdown, we're probably going to lose something like 1 million jobs on a permanent basis. So 1 million people are going to lose their job permanently. Over the next 6 months or so, maybe we can get another 1 million people back to work. But 1 million people are without jobs now. And if we put that like the numbers that I referred to earlier, that means that 5 million people will enter the poverty line or the various levels of poverty lines because 1 million people are without a job and 4 million people are dependent on that specific individual. But economic growth is not going to be with us for a long time, and poverty and unemployment is going to be with us for a long time until we make some drastic changes as far as policies are concerned in the country.
And you know, the reality is when we look at the sectors that absorb large amounts of the workforce, and we're talking to the mining, we're talking to construction, we saw that these numbers decreased dramatically. And these affect the real hard workers in the country. And I mean, these affects the people that, as you spoke to a bit earlier, that go out there and work and basically from hand to mouth every single day. Now, they are not finding jobs. And this just adds more and more to the country. I mean, let's focus on those two industries specifically, mining and construction.
Yes, those are very important industries, but I would rather focus on the secondary industry. I would rather focus on manufacturing because that is the place. If you really want to reduce unemployment in a country, that's the industry that we need to focus on. Manufacturing, but the primary sectors, like for example, agriculture and mining, those sectors are over time getting smaller and smaller relative to the rest of the economy. We find it all over the world. So that's not a place to look for if you want to employ more people. If you really want to employ more people, you have to look at the secondary sectors. Manufacturing is a very good example. And unfortunately, like I've mentioned, is that companies are making more use of machines and computers. You have to be very skilled to really employ a lot of people in the secondary sector. A country that was very, very successful in bringing unemployment down to, well, for all practical purposes, down to zero, is a country like China. That is a country where they put a lot of emphasis on manufacturing. They exported like crazy and they created a lot of jobs. I don't think we should put the emphasis on manufacturing and agriculture and mining. Those are not the places where we're going to create jobs. We need to create jobs somewhere else, and that's probably in places like manufacturing, but also in the tertiary industries, like for example, finance and the like. But there you need even better skilled people in the country. No, mining and agriculture is not the place to look for. Rather look at manufacturing.
Manufacturing. Government's efforts to try and grow employment, to try and grow the economy. I mean, we keep hearing from the president and from different sectors within government, the things that are being done, the investment that's being made, and how they're going to try and help create employment and create growth within the country. Yeah. What do you think of all of these plans?
No, let's be honest. It's not the virus that's led to all of this. It is the lockdown that led to this. I think the lockdown was managed completely incorrectly. I think we have to stop this lockdown immediately. I think we should put a lot of emphasis on people, on educating people about the virus, social distancing and so on. But it's the lockdown that's caused all of this, and I think we completely overdid the lockdown. If you compare South Africa to many other countries in the world, we had quite a severe lockdown, and now we are paying a price for that. So the first thing what you need to do is stop this lockdown. A second thing that we need to do, we have to get government to become significantly more competent in what they're doing. And that includes things like, for example, corruption. We have to stop that. Now, there are many examples of that. Try to get a license, try to get an account from a municipality. It is just extremely difficult to do business in South Africa. And the tax burden is completely unsustainable. And the state is far too big. There are too many civil servants, all those sort of things. We've spoken about this many, many times before. So instead of trying to put measures in place to grow the economy, government simply must get out of the economy. They must get away, and they must remove the obstacles that's standing in the way of the private sector trying to create jobs. And quite ironically, if you look at the unemployment numbers, for instance, the people working for the state, they didn't lose their jobs. Those 2 million people that lost their jobs are primarily people in the private sector. That's the engine of economic growth. It's not the state, it is the private sector. And that's where we're bleeding. That's where we're losing the jobs. And we're losing the jobs because of the lockdown, and we're losing the jobs because of the wrong macroeconomic policies in the country.
Just very quickly, as I start saying goodbye to you, we've moved to level 1, and basically, most sectors, if not all sectors, are now operational, albeit it's slowly to get that engine going. And unfortunately, a lot of businesses will not be reopening because financially they're not able to. But do you think this is going to change things? I mean, will we see now finally things looking better?
Yes, of course, they will see things will improve a little bit, and we will start creating some jobs. But I'm afraid it's probably going to take this economy about 10 years to get back where we were, say, 2 years or so ago. We were in a recession already. This is not a recession, this is a deep, deep depression. But yes, I think we've hit the bottom. Slowly we're going to start climbing out of this hole, but it's going to take us a very, very long time.
We've hit the bottom. What happens if a second wave of coronavirus comes and we enter into another lockdown? Then what?
That is the danger. I don't believe in the second wave. Of course, like I've said, I think it's a responsibility of individuals. But if we go back to level 2 or to level 3, I'm afraid this is going to be seriously, seriously painful to this economy and unemployment.
Dawie Roodt, thanks for talking to us, Chief Economist at the Efficient Group, giving us a bit of an understanding about the figures released by Stats SA yesterday. That's all about the unemployment figures here in South Africa. And the big one that came through, 2.2 million people lost their jobs during lockdown. And that basically means that only 14.1 people in South Africa are actually employed. The rest do not have jobs. Let's take a break. We'll see you with the news after this.